Hey, Graeme, morning. Or noon, evening, whatever it is there.
Hey, hold on. Sorry, my sound's not working. Give me a second.
Good morning, Marin.
Morning, Henry. How's it going?
It's going fine. And you know what? I yesterday found out that we can get money for the disaster recovery solution because we can save $100,000 per month if we just switch a small setting on the registry buckets that we have right now.
What?
Yeah, we have versioning enabled on our registry buckets, which is meaning that we more or less basically double the amount of storage that we really use. And we can easily turn this off and just delete all deleted objects. And we'll end up with half the usage that we have now within a few days, probably.
Are you sure? Do we delete any objects?
It's, yeah, because we upload each blob and then move it from a temporary place into the real place, which is a deletion. We tested it. So the deleted object just stays there because it's versioned and it's not deleted. And yeah, so Igor is taking over to do the setting so that we have a policy which is just deleting old deleted objects from the bucket. And that should free up a lot of money, I guess.
Not quite as big as the bucket you found, but I've definitely seen a lot of our buckets of just the default policy. And I've always questioned that because there's been some, like it might even be, I can't remember if it's like database or there's certainly, I don't think we've gone through all our buckets and had a look in a very long time.
I don't know what to say to that, Henry. That is awesome news, I guess.
But it's also hurting if you think about that, it wouldn't have been necessary, yeah.
I just don't know what to say to this because the amount of effort that is going into everything.
Yeah, and we also need to look at the other buckets that we have for uploads and things, because if they do it the same, like uploading and then moving to another thing, it could be that we also could halve the size there. I'm not sure about this, but at least for the registry, I'm sure it's the case. So that's really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Morning, everyone, or evening, Graeme. What have we got for demo today?
I was hoping to have something to demo, but unfortunately this week has very much got away from me. So everything I was kind of, even little bits I was going to demo of maybe some different pieces, I just unfortunately haven't had a chance to pull together. So really in terms of demo, this might be a bit of a short meeting. That being said, you know, I am interested in going through the blockers we have for the API migration, at least even quickly, just so to understand what they are and what have you.
I'm not aware we have any actually at the moment. Sorry, I haven't updated this agenda.
Okay.
As far as I am aware, so I spoke to Skarbek yesterday, and he is at certainly for the next step, right? So he is looking at logging, and that's the biggest question mark for moving to Canary.
Yeah.
So he is thinking, probably this week might be a stretch, but early next week, he'll have all the logging checked out. And then we need to do the vetting, the deployments. And then if we get those two pieces done, we're good to go to Canary.
Yeah, my last impression was that we already had the changes for logging, at least in an MR, which should be fixing what happened last time. But I'm not sure if he tested it right now. Right?
It's in testing. That's what he's testing out. Exactly. Yeah.
And I think there's another issue. It could be the same. It could be something slightly different in that obviously we're trying to put logs from two different sources into the one Elasticsearch index. And I think we had some kind of questions or yeah, I'm not sure exactly, but I know there's another issue that's open where we're still basically we need to be sure that we're not losing any observability, like we're not dropping any logs, but it seems like that. I think we may have discovered that there's already certain logs that is being dropped anyway. So we want to make sure we don't go backwards and then hopefully capture anything that is not there moving forward so that we can rectify that after the move.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we had two gaps. One was around some logs being missing, like gaps in the logs, and then the other was in total loss of logs. So I'm just pulling the issue up. Do you want to just summarize that summary that you put in the in this logging issue yesterday, Graeme, and the investigation you did on the enabling the GitLab logger. This comment. We can't hear you.
Whoops, sorry. It's okay, I was just talking away to myself. Okay, so I think, so I'm not completely across it all, and I was just kind of going off what Starbuck's kind of written there and my understanding of it, but it seems like we've identified at least places where we're missing logs. And once again, that we believe, I think, at least at some level, we're missing those logs now anyway, certain types of requests or certain fields from some requests. So the question is, do we try and fix that before we go to Kubernetes and what I kind of summarize, my personal feeling is if we're not going backwards, in other words, if we know we're missing logs, but we're missing logs on VMs, we're still going to miss logs on Kubernetes. Let's not make it a blocker and let's just move, because I think changing the logging will be easier when we're in Kubernetes rather than trying to fix things for both VMs and Kubernetes. Because I think what we kind of looking deeper, it seems like logs coming out of VMs look like one thing, logs coming out of Kubernetes look like a different thing, slightly different formats. And then Elasticsearch obviously expects things in one, the index we're trying to push them into expects them in one format. If we do, I suggested a few different other options, like we create a whole new Elasticsearch index just for the Kubernetes API pods, rather than pushing them to the same index as the VM API pods. That's not great, especially if we're running both, because you don't want to have to look through two indexes to see them. But maybe for the migration period, it's not going to be the end of the world. I don't know. I'm just trying to feel what is the quick option here to get us moving. And if it's like, hey, we got to live with something that's not perfect for 1 month while we migrate, then maybe we just do that. Because no matter what, things will be easier to fix when everything is over in Kubernetes. Like I think we need to get over there as quickly as possible. It's going to make our lives a lot easier. So yeah, I think we just kind of, I'll see what Scarbeck says, but he's got a better understanding of what we're missing. But I think that's something we'll cover in the readiness review. Either we'll highlight what we're doing, or if I don't know, we need to come to some decision about that. But I'll see what Scarbeck says in terms, because he has just a slightly better, better understanding as to what we're missing. But I don't know about anyone else, but I'm feeling if our logging situation is just as good as VMs, even if it's not perfect, we should not block and just move forward.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, as long as we know how to use them, and I think we've got that with adding in runbooks, then yeah, that makes sense. Like at least getting to Canary, right? Because then that hopefully gives us more information and we can make better decisions.
Do not forget, this is a lift and shift. This is not a lift and shift and improving of the situation that we currently have, right? Like the improvement comes from the fact that we are shifting.
Yeah, exactly.
So any blockers that are like this are not blockers. They are technical debt that has to be assigned to the epic named technical debt. The two of you, I don't know if you know about it, but there is an epic called the technical debt. And at the end of every migration, we take some time to clean up the most important technical debt. Again, this is the first time you're actually going through with this in the team, but every migration we did so far had at least 2 weeks of technical debt cleanup, right? Because that's, by moving, it gives us new information that allows us to reevaluate where we are at. And if we think we are in a good enough situation, that buys us time to actually clean up some stuff that we left behind, right? Amy will give you, well, you can find the technical debt epics, right?
I'm just finding it right now.
Sense.
Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. And as I said as well, I'd rather clean up technical debt for stuff in Kubernetes than try and clean it up for VMs and Kubernetes when we're trying to get away from VMs. Makes no sense. So.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of related to that, actually, Graeme, just to follow on from something we chatted about yesterday. The other one is Nginx, right? So we talked a bit about, we should make a decision on Nginx for API service. So we bypassed it for WebSockets. On API service, we're using Nginx to minimize like how many things we're changing all at once. So I chatted to Scuback yesterday, and again, similar, we should push this like way out, like after API service, probably after web nodes and review, and come back to that. So for now, we are using Nginx. It is upgraded. We can just keep going on that one.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense to me, and that's fine. I kind of see it, to be clear as well to everyone, taking a step back, what we need to be clear here is Kubernetes defines a specific concept called ingress that is supposed to be pluggable. So the specification for an ingress, you say, I want to listen, for this, and I want certain HTTP URLs to go here, there, and I want certificates or whatever. So they've defined a implementation agnostic specification for ingress. We have that in the chart. We should always have that. We should always be using that. But at the moment, and perhaps it's not a bad thing, but it's like that omnibus kind of philosophy where not only they design the specification, so you as the operator of your Kubernetes cluster picks the implementation. If you're on GKE, you get a GKE ingress controller and implementer automatically. Amazon's got their own. There's a million companies out there that surround. There's like 50 at least of them. And they're all, they all implement the specification. They all have their pros and cons, and some are good and some are bad for a lot of things. Ingress Nginx, which is one of the most popular ones, is used by a lot of people, and we use it because it is one of the first ones, and everyone knows Nginx. We use Nginx in the VMs and everything. But to be clear, we in GitLab.com, and we GitLab as a company with our Helm chart are not, to me, we are not 100% bound to Ingress Nginx. We are 100% bound to the specification. But we can say we recommend you use Ingress Nginx to fulfill this. But the whole point of Kubernetes Ingress specification is so that us as vendors don't have to ship something that implements it. It's up to it. We certainly can, and we certainly are happy to optionally, but we don't have to enforce Ingress Nginx. And I think we've already have support notes about using it with different Ingress providers. Where it's been tricky is while the specification has been there and the pluggable implementation, the specification has never been finalized until GKE 1.18. So it's never even hit version 1 of the spec. So it's gone through a lot of changes. There's a lot of differing implementations where people extend the specification to do their own thing without it being supported by everyone. So it's actually, I wouldn't say it was bad, but it wasn't one of the great specifications that's gone through the Kubernetes working group, but it will be finalized. And I think when that happens, you'll see a lot of the implementations kind of come back a bit with a bit more uniform. Like at the moment, when you change them, there are some bits and pieces that are kind of different between them. But I think as the maturity of the specification comes along, we should see all of the people that implement the spec be more uniform. And so for us, what that means is maybe after web and API, and honestly, this really folds into the HA proxy discussion as well, because really we want to eventually rip out our HA proxy nodes and just have an ingress specification with something implementing that in front of behind Cloudflare, and that's basically underneath that is our pods, because that's what Ingress is designed for. So, as I said, I think everything makes sense now, and I think there's a larger discussion of not so much should we replace Nginx, but I would phrase the discussion of, for our Ingress specifications that we are using, what is the implementer of those? What is the technology we're going to choose to implement them, and evaluating Ingress Nginx and all of the other ones and the pros and cons to that. I deployed CAS on GitLab.com running alongside everything else. It's using the GCP Ingress. It's actually not using Ingress Nginx, simply because it is WebSockets. And so we've had problems with Ingress Nginx and WebSockets, which, why we've turned it off for WebSockets. So I was like, well, I didn't want to pick up those problems of Ingress Nginx. It's the same Ingress specification that they're using as well as the web service pods. And it was like 2 lines of code, or 2 annotations on a Kubernetes object to basically say, okay, Google, you use your technology to implement the spec, and which is just a GCP load balancer with some managed certificates and everything. So it's really nice. And that's the other thing too, is you don't have to use the same one for everything. You could have 100 different pods or 100 different services using 100 different ingresses. They could be implemented or actually, implemented by completely different technologies. So it is pluggable. That being said, you wouldn't want to have 100 different types for trying to operate it, but we have flexibility there. So all of this, I think we can kind of wrap up and shift into that discussion maybe in the future about what we want to do with the front door with HA proxy and ingresses in general.
Isn't this also falling in the discussion maybe in the future if you want to use some kind of service mesh?
Exactly, yes. Yeah, so all the service mesh technologies usually implement the Ingress spec as well. So yes, it kind of folds into that as well. Oh, and it's also worth noting, funnily enough, but they've just finalized the Ingress specification, and they've already said, oh man, the specification, we know so much more now, we could do it so differently. So they've started throwing out Ingress as a concept, and now they're making a whole other new specification that's going to start again and be ready in like 4 years or something. So it's, as I said, it's a bit of it's a little bit of, it's not the best spec that they've done, but it is what it is.
I don't know if we already have issues for that stuff. I'm assuming we have it for at least some things, but it'd be good to get that in an issue at least. Yeah,
I think what I was thinking is the one we have for HA proxy is probably could be rewritten to support this. I think we would flesh that out as, we use HA proxy more or less as a VM based Ingress concept. What are we actually, because I think part of it as well is not just, should we use Ingress Nginx and everything? It's also looking at, well, we have HA proxy. What does that get us? Like, we might do IP blocks, or, how we do canarying is very much tied to HA proxy. Whereas, there are a whole bunch of technologies like service meshes and all these other things that can implement the Ingress specification that can do better canarying, quicker canarying, blue-green deployments, full different canary. Like, we can change actually the model we want to use depending on the what we use to implement the spec. So it would, to me, that HA proxy issue probably should become a little bit of an epic, and we should really kind of flesh that out as a discussion around that part, isolating the requirements we really want, and then talking about probably a fairly short list of what we feel would be the possible solutions for that. That's my feeling.
Yeah, that sounds like it makes sense. Be definitely a good one. We go through a nice milestone as we finish the stateless services in the next few months, and that might be a good point to pick up or review these things. Cool. One thing I realized I was going to ask you about, Graeme, was the database load balancing issue, which I don't know if is so much of a blocker as more, I guess, a corrective action at this stage, right? Like, it's clearly causing us pain and probably the cause of some recent incidents. Yeah, how's it going?
Yeah, so basically I should have, well, the only issue we have for tracking that at the moment is a GitLab issue. So I'm not sure whether we need a delivery side issue for it or what's going on, because I was a bit confused about that as well, of like how to assign myself or how to track that work. The short answer of it at the moment is I think we want to, as I mentioned yesterday, Jason's identified change to the code base to make debugging of this easier. So I think we want to get that into the app first and straight away, because basically the problems we're seeing them common enough, like we see them every day, multiple times a day kind of thing, that what we're logging and what we're currently seeing gives us an idea where the problem is. So for those of you who aren't aware, we're seeing, so our database load balancing relies on console, and we're seeing web service pods having problems talking to console and get load balancing information, which is obviously bad. It slows things down, it can cause problems and what have you. Myself and Jason, we're trying to identify, there's two parts to the DNS story. With that, there's the kube DNS side, which is a component part of Kubernetes, essentially, that's run by Google, that's completely hands-off from us. And then there is the console service itself, right? So when we do DNS requests or look things up, we have to talk to kube DNS to service discovery, which gives us DNS records as a service discovery to where console lives. And then we go to console and we look up the DB replica, whatever the record is that we say, get me the replicas, basically, and then that returns us back. We are seeing a breakdown in that process end to end, but we haven't got good enough logging to determine if it's on the kube DNS side or if it's on the console side. And looking at the logs for both of those components, we couldn't determine accurately where we think it is. We have some suspicion. So Jason's working on that section of the actual GitLab code base to make it error very clearly which DNS lookup it's doing, because at the moment it just wraps it up and it's like DNS lookups failed, but we don't know because there's like 2 or 3 DNS record lookups to get there. So once we have that.
Sorry, Graeme, who's doing the work on the GitLab Rails side?
Just Jason Plum.
Can we double check that?
Yeah, he started in MR, and then Stan, I saw, added a comment to it, and I didn't see what happened after that, but I'm not sure if he is driving it or whether he was just suggesting a change and hoping someone else would drive it.
Let's double check that, because I know Jason has like 15 other competing priorities, and not even his manager. So let's just double check that where that is, right? Like whether we need to escalate somewhere, hand it over, or maybe Jason is working on it. So just let's get the confirmation.
Sure. And I think the key is there, once we have that in place and we get a distinct avenue of where the problem is, which side the problem is occurring, I then intend to basically do a really deep, I guess, debugging session into what particular component it is. If it's the kube DNS Google side, I will probably almost certainly bring Google support in and as a first step and say, hey, what's going on? This shouldn't be happening. If it's in the console side, on our side, that's a little bit trickier, but I think, we'll just have to start digging and understanding how console's working in Kubernetes at the moment.
Thanks, Graeme. I added a couple questions here. One is that are we seeing this on staging? Do you know, or
I
not?
don't think we are, but that's not surprising, I think, because of the traffic difference. But I will actually double check that. But
I would expect, given what I know about the issue, I would expect to see it on staging, because what I see on production is that when pods start, we see these errors, and it always happens as Rails is coming online.
Right.
I think we also have occasionally see these errors in other situations, but this is the last I looked, this is where we saw like the errors mostly, and that's why I was thinking like this had something to do with initialization.
Yeah.
But if it is something that we can see on staging, then maybe we can kind of narrow it down, because I'm not. I guess I'm not super clear on like if console is running and pods are not cycling for console, then do we see this issue less frequently? Like I kind of want to rule out console if we can.
Sure. Yeah, and I agree, which is why I was kind of hoping the extra logging would basically point us completely in the right direction. But looking at staging certainly is another good heuristic to look at. We were noticing, so there's 3 kind of parts, right? There's when the web service pods cycle, there's where the console pods cycle, and we see them cycling actually probably more than we should be. And then there's when node cycles happen, which you think would be the same as the other two, but it's actually slightly different. So when we looked at this, and I do apologize, my brain is mush at the moment, we were noticing certain different errors, right? So this is the thing, there's actually two different classes of errors we're seeing. We're also noticing a certain type of error when pods were cycling, and then a different class of error, which was this unknown one that I think we couldn't directly track to any event yet. So that might be the piece of another piece of the puzzle. At any rate, but yeah, I agree. I think it's obviously the kubedns on console. Knowing my experience with kubedns, it could very well be kubedns doing something weird. But it would be Google actually have written, so Google automatically will scale kubedns for us, but they don't actually use just a generic horizontal pod autoscaler. They've written their own custom autoscaler that just runs as a pod in the kube system namespace. And it basically does, I assume, some magic behind the scenes to scale it up. What is interesting is if we look at the resource utilization of the kubedns pods, they're actually kind of high, like higher than even I would expect. So maybe that's suspicious. We don't capture any metrics at the moment for how many DNS requests are going to kubedns, I don't think, or anything like that. So I can't say it's that for sure, but it's certainly another gap we have in observability where we can say this is a critical component to us and we really don't understand what's going on.
So I guess if we don't see this on staging, then kubedns is a likely candidate, because I could see this being a thundering herd situation where you have a whole bunch of pods being brought up and a whole bunch of DNS queries being made at the same time.
Oh, right? And also kubedns pods are coming and going as well. That's the other scaling event, right? So we actually see multiple times a day, depending on our load, kubedns gets scaled up, kubedns gets scaled down. And it's a non-trivial amount of pods that's running as well. I think it's like at least 10, if not more. So, which for DNS seems like a lot to me, but
So I wonder if we can just get logs and Stackdriver for this.
So I had a quick poke in there. Nothing jumped out at me yet, but I haven't had a closer. I didn't get the chance to have a close look yet. To be honest, it's like third on my list. I'll be honest, it's third on my list of priorities behind the two incidents I'm kind of looking at the moment.
Sure. What are the this is a blocker, right, for probably moving API to past Canary? Is that what we're saying, Amy?
Well, I'm not sure. I think it looks more like a corrective action, right? So it's not new to the API service, right? It's already happening in production. We think it's linked to incidents, though, right?
I think the concern here is that it's putting extra strain on the primary database. We're already living with this for Rails for Git HTTPS, but to introduce this problem for API could cause more strain on the primary, right? And I think that's the risk we need to weigh. So maybe it'd be better to understand this a bit more before we move past Canary.
Sure, not a blocker to Canary though, right? So that's.
I don't think it's. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a blocker to Canary personally. It feels like we should be okay. Although lately with all of the incidents related to the database, and I think we should be careful.
Sweating over here,
but soon we'll have Sidekick talking to the replicas, so that will relieve some pressure.
So how safe is it if we put if doing a gradual ramp up over on Canary? Is this everything just immediately breaks, or it's as we add more traffic in, we increase the problem here?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Canary it will be fine because we'll probably run with I don't know how many pods we're going to run for Canary to start, but probably around 10 maybe. And so I don't think it's going to be that problematic for Canary. I wasn't thinking that before. I think just to be aware of this before we move to the main stage is important.
Yeah,
I do agree. I really do. Don't get me wrong. As I said, it is high priority to me. Just because I haven't spent as much time on it as I would like. I do want to understand what's going on. I've had kubedns kill me in that, like, it's the most problematic component I've had for a very long time doing on-premise installation. So it really wouldn't surprise me if it's an issue. I never got back to it. I still have to open, I cut down some of the DNS traffic. Remember Java with that MR, I need to push that into production now. It's been in staging, it's baked long enough. I'll try and get that up tomorrow to merge that into production. That's not going to be a bulletproof fix, but it's just some tiny little fixes. I probably should put a ticket into observability to see if we can start capturing more metrics out of kubedns. I think just some general hit rates of like how many requests we're doing and things like that could be regardless, I think would be really useful just to understand, if there's any kind of, any things we're doing we can improve, or to track any sudden changes in that as we bring new services on.
Sounds good. In terms of next steps on the readiness review, is there anything useful we can use the next like 20 minutes or so to like push forwards? Like, how are we looking with kind of setting up like how many nodes we have and making decisions around things like that?
Yeah, so I said I really apologize. I haven't even had a chance to really look. I had a chat with Henry earlier this week, and I wanted to chat with Skarbek as well. I just haven't had a chance to really close the loop on that. But from my side, nothing has changed. I'm not sure if anything's changed from your side, Henry.
No, the last where I stopped working on this was that I looked into the amount of traffic that we are seeing currently in production to get an estimate of how many nodes or pods we would need probably. But this still isn't fully finished. So we need to continue on that, getting those numbers together by looking also what we came up with as numbers with the other Kubernetes deployments to get a feeling for what we will end up with API eventually. And this is coming together with the vetting API issue, because that's also about testing what happens if you stop traffic on a node or crash a node, for instance, and to see how it reacts coming up again, and how we set these different tuning settings for scaling and blackout periods. So this is to be done right now. This is the missing piece.
So just perhaps for my benefit, some very basic questions, I guess, just to make sure my headspace is clear. So we're going to rerun an API in the zonal nodes because we don't want cross-zonal traffic, I assume. And they're going to be obviously web service pods that are exactly the same as like the Git HTS web service pods and everything. But I assume they're going to be a distinct Kubernetes deployment from, say, the web service pods for the other components. And I assume a dedicated node pool for them as well. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you look at the readiness review as it is in the branch of the EMR that I put in there, it's basically down to the details of which kind of node type we are using currently. And from there, what kind of load we have and how many requests and how many nodes and the VMs. And from there, we now need to get to the conclusion, what would we need in Kubernetes to serve the same kind of traffic. So that's the thing that needs to be done now.
Cool. Okay. Well, obviously, like incidents have to come first. So completely fair that's where we are right now. Is there anything anyone wants to usefully use the last 10 or 15 minutes for, or more useful to have time back?
So I guess the only other thing I'll briefly mention, because it's kind of tangentially related to Kubernetes migration, and I'll try and be very brief. I put in the delivery channel there a little note. I had a discussion with the security product manager for GKE today. He's in Sydney, Australia, hence why I guess Dave pushed him my way, because I was at least in his time zone for him. It was a good conversation, actually. It seems you know, they're very keen to work with us to, you know, see what they can do to help us with basically anything. The big takeaways for there that I think are usable or interesting to us moving forward to solve problems we have. They're going to basically be introducing Google Container Registry to, at the moment, you can use it as like a replacement registry. So like you push things to it and it just acts like a hosted registry. But they've had a lot of feedback, which I think we would echo, that we like our own registry, but we would like you guys to proxy it and provide a bit more speed and availability of our registry. So they're releasing functionality to do that coming soon. And so I think that will help us break that dependency on like charts and images on dev.gitlab.org. Basically, we'll have the same workflow and we'll just proxy it through this Google Container Registry so that it can cache things for extra speed. And if things go down, then at least it's all cached there nicely.
How would that work for Helm? I saw you mentioned Helm as well.
So there's a specification out that Docker images, Helm charts stored in Docker images. More or less.
I see.
So Helm has experimental support for it, and Google's like committed to basically. So there's either that. I couldn't get a straight answer out of him. I think that was the way he was leaning, but he also possibly indicated that they will actually run like an actual chart registry, if you know what I mean, like a HTTP.
Yeah, right.
But either way, you know, they're trying to position it now as that model of have your own registry and we'll just proxy through, and you know, you can just leverage us for availability and speed.
But it doesn't necessarily make our configuration less complicated, though it does allow us to have like one single funnel to dev. So we would configure their registry proxy to point to dev or something like that, right? And then we would just use it.
Yeah, so I think how it works actually, so I don't know, once again, I don't know the final implementation, the dev will be in the details, but I think there's what they might even be doing. So there's typically you can use it now by just like literally just write your image to like something GCR with some extra like paths in the URL that it can figure out where to proxy to, like with the actual full name later in the URL or something. But I think there's also, they might use a mutating webhook. So when you send the manifest to the GKE instance, it rewrites it and then actually changes it to basically use their mirrored copy, if that makes sense. So you're still sending dev.gitlab.org, but you configure GKE to say, anytime you see dev.gitlab.org, actually like point that to your proxy and tell your proxy to proxy it, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So
that would be interesting, because then we don't change URLs or do anything. We're just configuring GKE with the things it needs to know, and it will just do, quote unquote, do the magic. But I guess we'll see how the implementation looks. So they're improving the notifications when I get about auto upgrades, which is nice. So at least when we get auto upgrades, at the moment, I have no idea why this upgraded, but they're going to tell us like CVEs, actual real, like this is why we've upgraded your cluster. Very nice. Can't remember. The other thing, we had a bit of a discussion about GitLab CI. He was very, very excited about GitLab CI. Probably of no interest to anyone in this meeting, which is fine. But basically, he was saying more or less they've invested heavily into gvisor in the last year. They themselves used to run all their untrusted workloads, so Cloud Run, Cloud Functions, anything that was purely untrusted, they ran on GCP VMs, obviously, same as us, because we trust. They now run everything on all of that on GKE. So they have a lot of experience and a lot of know-how that they're absolutely happy to talk to anyone and anyone about how to run purely untrusted workloads on GKE. So he's basically going to introduce me to some people, but I might put some updates on some tickets or something, or pointing to other people who are interested.
Graeme, I reopened that ticket about gvisor about 2 days ago, because I feel that it was prematurely shut down. So just take it. I think you're on the thread already.
Yeah, I will.
I'll use that as a,
Sure. Yeah, that's good. And I don't know where the company's overall appetite for this. I actually do. Basically, I'm kind of putting the ball in their court. If they can convince, my opinion is, if they can convince us that this can really just run untrusted workloads and it's in a state where it can do that.
Yeah.
Maybe
the evidence for me of that is apparently Cloud Run is doing this.
Yeah.
So you know, if all they're using to protect that Kubernetes cluster against Cloud Run Docker images is gvisor, and they don't have some other magic Google stuff.
No, yeah.
But you know, if that's their primary sort of thing, then I think it's good enough for because having that would just bring in so many advantages. You know, we've got massive ingress expenses again in the last month, and no one really knows what it is. And gvisor would stop ping floods, for example. You know, and also just being able to reuse VMs and not boot up a VM every time you run a container. I mean, that would be huge cost saving.
He also gave me a bit of insight into, so there's that Google Autopilot, which they're very much pushing at the moment, which I thought, yeah, that's fine. It doesn't really interest us. But he actually pointed out that that is their push towards general Kubernetes as a hard multi-tenancy untrusted workloads. So he was saying that a lot of the work they did on that is they're now bringing back to like, we can leverage work on that, because what they do in the master side is they've actually got like Gatekeeper, which is an upsource project. They've forked that. They've done a bunch of work so that basically at other levels, not just using gvisor, but like at network level, at pod spec level, they've got this layered defense system now, he was saying, that they're pushing through. So yeah, we'll see what comes out of it. But I agree. The other thing is, at the moment, I didn't realize this, all our CI infrastructure, so our runner managers are not in, I don't think they're in Chef, or they're not in Terraform. They're completely like, poor Alex has to go spin them up by hand whenever we want new ones, because I don't know who knows how to spin them up. And basically we kind of just handcraft them into Chef and everything like that. And I actually think we've gotten pretty good at spinning up GKE clusters and deploying things on them now, that, you know, I think we could actually provide a much better experience for deploying and managing runner managers as well, if they're on Kubernetes. But anyway.
Yeah, I
tend
to agree.
What do we depend on at the moment to be able to do that? Sorry, I phased out at the gvisor talk. I just don't have the brain capacity. Sorry about that. But can we do something now to improve the manager story?
We probably could. I mean, as part of the ongoing incident work relating to CI, I believe, like, we're rebuilding runner managers, right? We've got to split out the Google project. We're going to try and split by tier. So I think we're going to rebuild them and try and do it right.
No, actually, the first thing we're doing is we're launching VMs in alternate projects, but we're not moving the shared runner managers. They're going to stay in the single project. So that's a fairly small change, and that will get us past the quota issues. I think where this could help us is to save cost, right? Like, we'll be more efficient launching runners in Kubernetes, but this is a fairly big shift in how we manage the runners. So I think I would say it's a medium long-term project.
I agree.
What does what did I want to ask? Okay.
I mean, I don't see any benefits. I don't see any benefits outside of cost savings for this.
But the reason, the reason why I was asking is because we have a question for the registry project to provide new runners for pre, because pre doesn't have runners. What we did in staging is we just connected the existing managers there, but that doesn't work. Like, it doesn't scale. We overload those runners on staging as well periodically. So I was looking into it yesterday, and I don't want to add shared runners again to pre now, because that is going to add another level of, right, like another hidden level of load. So we will need to create new runners, new managers for pre, which will also mean, well, it's time to create new runners for staging as well, to separate those workloads out. And this is not cost now. Like, we're not talking about just pure manager management, you know. We can't continue this way because it takes forever to build them out. So I'm wondering if there is a shortcut we can take in whatever this might be, but apparently no, because that's a medium to long term.
I mean, I would say the benefit is for cost and for isolating untrusted workloads. For internal use, I think we could just use Kubernetes to run for runners, right? And we've done that before. I know that we have had some issues with that, but like we could take that route for pre instead of using a runner manager or a dedicated runner VM. We could use Kubernetes.
Yeah, I think we would just toggle some more things in the Helm chart to install a runner manager, and then create a new namespace in pre, like a Kubernetes namespace for the actual job, and maybe even a node pool. Who knows? And then we would just configure that runner manager through the chart in the exact same pipeline we do now, and then just only turn it on for pre, just like we turn on everything else in that chart for pre or for staging or whatever. We could probably leverage what we have to get, because I'm assuming there's not that much CI needed in pre. So so turning it on in pre just for, especially for our own internal stuff, is probably not that difficult.
Henry, I think this is the way to go.
I wasn't aware of this issue. I need to look into this now.
Yeah, I'll have to pull it into a proper issue. It's been it's not a proper issue, but it's a problem for sure.
It's a problem. So Henry, look, there is a lot of happening. Like Amy, don't feel bad that this didn't happen yet. Like it's fine. Like the registry project is a behemoth. Like
no,
it's really
I think I'm
ridiculous.
less like, oh, this is a task, but more this was a kind of hidden comment on a closed issue. More that it's of course it's missed, right?
So it was basically like one of the registry folks said, oh yeah, and we need runners. Wait, what? Now we also need runners? So basically this is going to have to happen. And Amy, now you're finding out in the meeting with everyone else. I looked into this, and no, we're not going to be adding what we already added to staging. We need to separate those workloads. We can't have this hidden cost that exists there. So if this is the shortcut we can take, and it also allows Henry to check out something new, it could also help us out in staging if it ends up working, right?
Yeah, Henry, if you want, I can even pair with you sometime, and I know exactly the settings we would need. It wouldn't be much work to get this going. We just create a new namespace and some nodes.
For sure should pair about this. Yeah, that sounds great.
Cool.
All right, that's great. I'll open up an issue then, so we've got that in delivery, and ping you both on it, Henry, Graeme, and then that sounds like a great place to test out this setup as well, right? So that we can hopefully do something good with staging.
And if we invest time into something, it should be that, not building out a new manager that has to be manually configured and all of that stuff.
Super, that's great. And thanks for looking at that, Maren. I'm not sure where you find the hours. You got like a time machine?
No, it's, you know that day has actually 25 hours, right?
Right, yeah.
That's the extra hour that I get ahead of everyone.
Okay.
Is that what daylight savings is about?
Yeah, pretty much.
No, we lose an hour this time, Graeme. It's worse. It's the bad time of year. So, awesome. Super. Is there anything else anyone wanted to share? Thanks so much for sharing that stuff, Graeme. That's all incredibly interesting. I've put it in the agenda, just so we don't lose it if Slack clears. But at some point, we should get these into issues and see where we can actually take this stuff. But yeah, really interesting stuff. Is there anything else anyone wants to cover this morning, today? No? Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you later.